Hello and welcome back to another episode of the On the Sideline podcast with Jackson and Kyle. I am Jackson, and I'm joined here, as always, by the man who is still taking calls to be a head coach. Kyle, how are you doing?
Doing good. I was really holding out for that Seattle job, but it didn't come through. So, but regardless, anyone needs a resume, go ahead and let me know.
Yeah, Washington, there's still only 32 jobs taken, Kyle. There's still hope. Or only 31 jobs have been taken. There's still hope.
Yeah, there's still hope. I don't know how much I'd want Washington's job.
I think I would take it if they're going to give me millions of dollars to coach a team. I don't know if I would do very well, but I would take it.
Yeah. I guess, now that Dan Snyder's not there, it's probably more desirable, right? I would definitely take it for millions of dollars without Dan Snyder there. I would just be worried about being, poisoned by snake oil venom with Dan Snyder around. So,
right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Carolina's got to be the worst job, right?
At this point, who would be the worst person to work for? That's the question. Is it him?
Well, just on Earth?
No, in NFL.
Okay. Probably. Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I would say so. I can't imagine who else would be fun to work. I mean, Jerry Jones obviously would have a lot of issues, but I don't know. There would be some questions there. But yeah, Tepper does not seem like a fun time.
Yeah, but potentially not. So here's what we're going to do with this show. First kind of off-season podcast that we're doing here where, not necessarily, I don't know, we might talk some Super Bowl, but mostly just going to talk about several different topics. We're going to do the head coaching hires. We're going to kind of go through one by one, give our thoughts on each of those and the GM hires that have happened. We're going to also talk about it's been a discussion, the Mahomes GOAT conversation. So we figured we'll do I don't know how long we'll spend on that, but we'll talk about it. It's been in the headline, so I figured it's worth discussing. Also, we're going to have questions. We're going to answer your questions. So if you have not already, there's a community tab on this channel. You can ask a question there. So definitely make sure you do that. And we'll, also, once we get there, if you want to just ask your question in the chat, we can see that as well. But yeah, should be an interesting show. Kyle, you want to just get into it?
Yeah, let's jump right in. So as he was saying, we when the season's going on, when playoffs are going on, especially, it's so hard to especially when we're only here twice a week. It's so hard to really dive into a lot of the off-season content and early off-season content. So jumping in on some of these coaching hires that have happened, there is still one job open. There's one job left, as we said at the top of the show. But we can go break down some of these big hires early on. And, this I guess the story of this is the youth movement. The youth movement of the NFL, it seems like, going on. And what do you think of the hire so far and just that overall aspect of all these guys under 50, kind of getting head coaching opportunities?
Yeah, well, I figure we can go one by one. Maybe we should start off with the two guys who didn't get hired, right? Vrabel and Belichick still on the market, despite the fact that they have pretty impressive resumes. Vrabel got a 1 seed and a coach of the year. Belichick has 8 Super Bowl rings. Neither one of them get a head coaching gig. And there were some reports, some rumors that Belichick kind of wanted more power than certain organizations were willing to give up, which is part of why he might still be on the market. But what's your take on your two guys not still being jobless, although there still is one opening available?
Yeah, I would say the Vrabel one, based on the circumstances, is a little more surprising to me than the Belichick one. Mm-hmm. I'm a little surprised an owner didn't step in and say, Belichick is our guy. We're hiring Belichick. Just because of the name value, the recognition, kind of, that sort of optimism it inspire a team. When you hear the reports and the explanations, I understand why a GM would not want to hire Bill Belichick.
Yeah.
That is, not only does it carry a ton of expectations if you're a GM, but then also there is going to be some semblance of Belichick wanting a say in roster personnel and roster decisions. I guess we should say every coach has some semblance of a say in roster decisions, right? A good GM is not is in communication with the coach, I would assume, when it's who are we drafting at quarterback, stuff like that. And that would be a good, healthy relationship. The question is can you have a good, healthy relationship with your coach and GM when it comes to roster decisions when the coach is Bill Belichick? And I think
Right.
that's the question that comes into play. And, why, based on the reports, especially out of Atlanta, where Arthur Blake wanted Belichick, but the GM in the front office was like, yeah, we don't know about that. I think that's the interesting conversation when it comes to Belichick and his future, because it doesn't seem like he's going to coach this year. Maybe he holds out for a year, does some TV stuff like that, gets back into the coaching circle next year. I think that's where it becomes interesting. And, is he going to be able to relent on some of that next season?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, and it's also the question too of like, well, let's say Washington calls up Belichick and says, "Listen, well, we'll hire you as a, to be on our, be our head coach, but we're not going to give you any power other than that. That's all you get." Does Belichick just hold out for a year?
Mm-hmm.
We started with Mike McCarthy, right? He didn't get the job he wanted. He waited a year and then got a job he wanted. Could that happen for either of these guys?
Definitely. I mean, uh, just think of the teams we talked about getting eliminated from the playoffs, and we brought up the conversation, like Dallas, Buffalo. Like, you would definitely rather wait a year for Dallas or Buffalo than take Washington right now, right?
Hmm. Probably. I still feel like I don't know. It feels weird to me that Washington is like the one that no one wants to go to.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a bad job.
Hmm.
Um, and especially, I, I don't know. It is interesting. Like, I don't know. I understand why Belichick wouldn't want to go there, I guess, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Because,
It's not a great
like,
job either.
it's very clear that Belichick's goal is to get the wins record, and that's not the easiest job to go ahead and get that. If he was going to wait out for a team that he thinks he could win with right away, like Atlanta did make sense because like as long as he found a quarterback or they added a quarterback, like that team could be pretty competitive pretty quickly. But Washington, I think, has a few more steps between now and then, so I understand why he wouldn't want to go for that. So yeah, I think it just becomes that question of, is Belichick just kind of waiting for that perfect job, or Vrabel, for example, too. And you know, it seemed like too when it came to the Tennessee thing, like Tennessee wanted to overhaul their roster, and it didn't seem like, I don't know, from an outsider's perspective, it didn't seem like Vrabel in the front office were on the same page as far as like the turning over the roster, and I think that was probably the problem in the end. I don't know. What did you think of that whole situation?
I thought it was weird. I don't the Titans, but the Titans have been just kind of they made some weird moves because I remember they got rid of their GM. A lot of people were surprised about that, even though it kind of made some sense because they had made some weird moves. This was a couple years ago at this point. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was weird at the time. It's even more strange that no one's picked up Vrabel. So I don't know. I don't have a huge theory on what happened there, I guess.
Yeah. Would you predict either of these guys to be Washington's coach?
I don't think so because I feel like it would have happened. Well, I don't. I think there's a chance because I think Washington wanted Ben Johnson, so I think it's possible. I suppose.
Hmm. I think if I were to bet on one of these guys, it'd probably be Vrabel for the job. I just don't see Belichick's desire
Yeah,
to want to coach that team and do a rebuild.
yeah.
You
Because
know?
for all Washington's faults, they have the number 2 overall pick. They have weapons. Like, and I think that
Yeah.
like they definitely needs pieces, like especially defensively. But like, there's worse spots to be in than a team who could be getting a good quarterback.
Yeah. Yeah, I 100% agree. So it becomes an interesting proposition. I think, as we're talking about the guys who didn't take jobs, and we're going to talk about it, I think, especially in comparison to some of the guys who did get jobs. I think along with these two, like it also is interesting to me that Ben Johnson and Bobby Slowick, who were kind of the guys that were tipped as the top two kind of up and coming candidates this year, also didn't get jobs. And, other offensive coordinators were chosen over those two guys. And you probably, if you're going to predict an offensive coordinator to get a job, those are probably the first and second picks if you did a fantasy draft on it, right? And so
Hmm.
I think it's just become interesting to see the decision making. And a lot of this also has to do with us not being in the room for these interviews, but it's just interesting to kind of see how that played out.
It is. Yeah. I mean, well, it seemed like they both probably could have gotten jobs if they wanted to, right? Just not maybe their pick it or litter, but Ben Johnson, I'm convinced if he wanted to be with the Washington Commanders, he would be the coach of the Washington Commanders.
I think so too. But like, so the most desirable jobs, I guess. Like, I understand why a Jim Harbaugh would get a job over those guys, right?
Yeah.
But as far as unless they did not want the Atlanta job, the Carolina job, or who's the other offensive coordinator that got hired? I'm drawing a blank. Hang on. It was Atlanta, Carolina, and then Titans, Tennessee job. Unless they just didn't want those jobs, that's the other part. So yeah, I don't know. It just becomes interesting to see how that played out. And now, once again, these guys are going to go back into the cycle. These guys are going to have awesome seasons as coordinators, probably. And then it becomes the question of, are they the top candidates again next year, or is it going to be or are they still competing with Belichick and Vrabel for the same jobs?
Right. I don't know. I'm always kind of like, listen, the amount of money you get being a head coach, like, I would just take the head coaching job. I don't care where it is. If it's the
Mm-hmm.
Carolina, like that's the Dave Canales thing. It's like, okay, you get an opportunity. You had a great year. You don't know if it's going to happen again. For him, it totally makes
Mm-hmm.
sense, in my opinion, to go after that job. But again, I mean, I think there is the emotional aspect of it, right? Like if you're Ben Johnson, you were so close to winning the Super Bowl, you don't want to just go somewhere else and start a complete rebuild, even if, because who knows? What if Jared Goff gets injured next year? Like now you're not going to be probably getting a job offer. So unless you have an amazing season with the backup. Here's my thought, Kyle. Why doesn't one of these teams, if I'm the Lions, hey, Ben Johnson, here's $10 million a year. Just stay with us.
Yeah, just be our coordinator for as long as we want you.
Yeah, you can just give him a head coach salary. He's shown that he's that
Yeah.
valuable.
I just don't think owners like doing that stuff, honestly. Like, and I think a lot of like, not to mention like, I think it also comes down to like, the conversation beyond the Deshaun Watson contract, where all the other owners were pissed at Cleveland, basically, because the precedent it sent to give a guaranteed contract, even
Hmm.
though like the Deshaun Watson off the field stuff aside, like an elite quarterback is definitely worth the guaranteed money. Like he's definitely worth it if he is that good. Now Deshaun Watson hasn't been that good is the issue, but the owners were just like, why would you do that? Because it sets the precedence that quarterbacks can demand guarantee money. I don't think they would do that because then really good offensive coordinators would just start demanding absurd contracts.
Yeah, but whatever. Like you're happy.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't
I
know.
get it. It's a
It's
sort of
so much
a
more of a boys' club than we actually
yeah.
like want to give it credit for.
You're right. You're right. It's the same reason why like in hockey, there's almost never like those. What is it? I think it's even the case in the NFL too. Like you can I forget what it's called, but where you can like an offer sheet. Why those never are signed, even though like it would totally make sense to sign offer sheets. It's just like owners don't want to make other owners mad.
Yeah, exactly. So
Well, let's get into the teams that actually have made decisions. We have a decent amount to talk about. Let's start off with your team, why don't we, Kyle?
mhm.
Patriots talk is back. It's been too long.
Patriots talk is back. We're all excited. You know, it's an interesting moment in Boston sports history with the Patriots, kind of brutal 4 years. The Red Sox deciding they're going to be the most broke team in the MLB. And then, the Celtics and Bruins are kind of taking over. So the Patriots had to make a splash, and they didn't really make a splash. They just hired the guy from within. They
Hmm.
hired Gerard Mayo. So this was the interesting aspect of this deal was in the offseason, he just restructured his contract, and they didn't really explain the language last summer, but they basically said along the lines of in his contract was a deal in place to become the next head coach following Belichick's what was assumed to be Belichick's retirement when he was done. Um, Fast forward to January, and Belichick's out because of not retirement, but because they're parting ways, or they wanted to go in a new direction. And the question was, is this promotion thing, this succession plan that they had in place, still actually going to be the possibility? Turns out, the very next day, Jerome Mayo is hired as the head coach. That succession plan is still in place, and they hire that before the GM's even hired, which is the most interesting thing I think about this. But
Hmm.
um, you know, my general thought on head coach hirings, like I don't really care about as much as others, like offensive and defensive coordinator hires, promotions, all that kind of stuff. If you're a good head coach, you can figure it out. I do think if you do hire a defensive guy, their first question answered has to be, "What are you doing about the quarterback position?" And from all intents, all quotes about Mayo, it sounds like they're going to be aggressive in the quarterback market in the draft. So we'll see. Um, but yeah, so it's just like I like the hire. I'll give it a chance. We'll see how it works out. And he did good with the defense, so I'm okay with that too.
Well, I didn't know that there was some sort of deal in place already to lock them into this sort of thing. But I mean, so I don't know. If this feels like a bit of a weird hire for me, Kyle, because I almost feel like, what's the point of getting rid of Belichick if you're going to just get one of his disciples? Like at that point, why not just keep Belichick?
Yeah, that was the question everyone was asking. But I think one of the because I was questioning it at first, just because like why even make the change then?
Mm-hmm.
Like you were saying. But I think one of the things that kind of turned me around is like every single player has basically gone out of their way to openly support him in a way that like I didn't like think would like happen. Like it seemed like
Mm-hmm.
every player on the team had an Instagram post congratulating Gerard Mayo for the job, right, and that kind of thing. And it just seems like he comes off as a guy that gets the buy-in factor, and maybe that just needed to take place. They needed someone that they wanted to play for a little bit more, and that could be the aspect where it is with Mayo that makes a difference. And then, like I said, I don't think the Patriots' issues last season, on defense at least, was coaching. I think the issue with the Patriots was personnel on the offensive side of the ball. So he's going to have to address those questions, and he's filling out his coaching staff. They've interviewed, it seems like, every offensive coach in football imaginable for the offensive coordinator position. So how they make that, whoever they make for that hire, and how they develop that offensive talent is going to be his biggest question to whether this succeeds or not. I think he can be a good coach. It just comes down to how does he fill out his staff and how does he address the offense.
Patricia's available.
Yeah, he should stay available. You know,
Potentially.
there's been some interesting rumored interviews. Like I don't know, Wes Welker was a name that was brought up. I think
They're just
they've been
bringing the band back together at that point.
Yeah, exactly. That'd be pretty funny. I think they've been mentioned with like 4 or 5 guys in the McVay coaching staff on the offensive side of the ball. So maybe that's the direction they go. And I mean, honestly, if they hire someone from the McVay tree to be the coach, I would be pretty happy for offensive coordinator hiring there, regardless of who it is. Give it a shot.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. So let's move on. Why don't we? Let's go to Jim Harbaugh, because this was a big one. So Harbaugh and Joe Hortz is the GM for the Chargers. So I mean, Harbaugh obviously kind of like it felt like the Chargers, they were kind of the one team. It's like, hey, we have the quarterback already. Feels like that's why he's coming here. He feels like, he feels confident in a team with a quarterback here. So, I think it's I think this is definitely an interesting move. I would say this was a great hire by Harbaugh for Hortz, someone who was kind of a scout for the Ravens for a while, kind of worked his way up into that, high up in that organization, and then he comes over here with the Ravens for like over, I think it was like 25 years before coming here. So interesting how that works. But yeah, feels like 2 really good hires here.
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea what to have an opinion on for the GM hiring. Like, it's another one where I don't really know these people, so it's hard to tell. Like, I can do the bio read and kind of see, like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But yeah, I mean, the big thing, like, for a franchise that has been kind of called like losers for this century, right? And even when they've been successful, they've been wildly successful this century, and they've still been considered kind of losers because they don't win the big games, right? That's kind of the Chargers' MO. Like, I guess this is the perfect hire in that, if you want to change your fortunes, this is kind of the guy you want, right? This is the so I think that makes sense. And I mean, look, Jim Harbaugh has been, I mean, basically successful everywhere he's went. He was 44-19 during his time at San Francisco. At Michigan, he was 86-25, including the most recent national championship. Now, I think that's a really hard place to coach in the modern college football game. I think the academic standards are higher than a lot of their opponents. I think doing as well as he has the past few years has been really impressive. He was also really impressive at Stanford, 29-21. They haven't been nearly that successful since he left. So yeah, I think that's a really good hire in that regard. I think the record speaks for itself. The resume speaks for itself. I think he's a really good coach. I guess the one question I have for Harbaugh is, for all of his success, all of his coaching records and resume, he's not exactly the most offensively advanced coach in the NFL, in football history, right? So you're giving him this setup, and the whole Chargers mindset this offseason should have been, how can we maximize Justin Herbert in this window with Herbert? I guess the question I'm going to have is, how does he maximize Herbert? Because he is not naturally this like offensive innovator, right? So I guess that's the question I'll have going forward.
But isn't kind of the thought of like, well, he's not, but he can just get everything else done, and then Herbert can do enough offensively. Like, I think, isn't that the logic?
Yeah, absolutely. And that should be I guess that's the part that makes sense, right? Like, you give him the great quarterback, and then he figures out the rest of the roster, as you were saying. So, I think this is an A+ hire. I think, it's going to be interesting to see how it works out. But like I said, it's hard to bet against Harbaugh. He's been really good.
Yeah. So, it's very fast. Yeah, it feels like it's a big win. Also, there's a Steelers fan in the chat who seemingly is just here to argue that TJ Watt is better than everyone else.
There are fans no such thing as a more loyal fan than a TJ Watt fan. Apparently, they will go to bat for everything. I respect it.
Even if no one's saying the opposite, we're talking about Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers.
I know. Fantastic.
Yeah, we love it. I guess we want to move on to the next team.
Yeah, let's keep going.
Okay, let's go Raiders, Antonio Pierce and Tom Telesco. Now, I know you said you don't care, you don't have too much of an opinion on the general manager side of things. I have an opinion on the Tom Telesco hire here, Kyle.
Yeah.
Telesco, if you're unaware, was the general manager for the Chargers from 2013 to 2023. In that time span, they made the playoffs 3 times. They won 2 playoff games in that stretch. Despite the fact that they've had good quarterback play for just about all of that. This was a weird hire for a team that tends to make weird hires, and even Antonio Pierce is a bit of an odd one. Antonio Pierce, this was the first year he had anything above a linebacker. He was a linebacker coach in 2022, and then this year he started that, ended as the head coach as an interim. Does well enough that they decide to keep him as the head coach. That one's interesting. We'll see how it goes. Definitely feels like no other team was going to hire him from what he did, but also players apparently really went to bat for him. I think like Max Crosby said he would demand a trade if Pierce wasn't back. So they liked him. So I get it. But a couple of weird ones here by the Raiders.
Yeah. So yeah, like I said, I don't generally have GM opinions because I just typically read the bios on these guys and I don't know them, but this is the kind of bio you read and you have questions about, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would not pick the GM of the Chargers as someone that would be at the top of my GM hiring list.
Right.
Especially what we saw from this Chargers roster this past season. So definitely some questions there. We'll see if it works out. Maybe he has a better plan of action for this team. He could have blown away the interview. We'll see if it works out. The Antonio Pierce one, I do think it's interesting. Like, does it feel like they're trying to rectify their previous mistake of not just, hiring Rich Bisaccia, I guess? And so this time it like mildly worked out, so they had to do it?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's what happened. I think that this is I think Pierce might have Josh McDaniels to thank for this.
Yeah. That's probably it. And they probably didn't want to pay a top of the line head coach after paying multiple head coaches, right? To get to fire. So I think that all plays a factor in it. But yeah, I mean, like, it's going to be interesting just because I don't know Antonio Pierce. Like, he could be like a brilliant X's and O's guy or something like that. But a guy who hasn't called plays his entire coaching career, which, obviously, he hasn't coached that long. Most of us in our lifetime watched Antonio Pierce play football, so he hasn't been retired that long. But yeah, he never called plays, I think, in his coaching career, or he might have 1 year at Arizona State. Because I know 1 year it was like him and Marvin Lewis were the defensive coordinators, and then he was the defensive coordinator in his own right. So I guess maybe 1 year he probably called plays. So I think, this is another one, I'm okay with giving Antonio Pierce a shot. He is going to have top of the line coordinator hire, though.
Well, yeah, I mean, the one thing I would say about Pierce, because who knows of this stuff, right? We always say like, oh, this looks terrible. This things work out that we don't expect to work out, and things don't work out that we expect to work out. The one thing I would say with Pierce is it's the Mike Vrabel thing, right? remember Mike Vrabel, he had like 1 year as a defensive coordinator for the Texans when they had like the worst defense in football that year, and then he gets hired to be a head coach. But like he's such a good leader, and he nailed the coordinators and kind of let them do their thing as well. Wasn't meddling, that it worked out. That's kind of the pathway with Pierce, you have to think.
Yeah, I would definitely say so. So I mean, it would make sense, and you know, uh, there's also a few other things. I mean, this is another one where you're hiring a defensive guy. He's going to have to answer the quarterback question. Maybe they roll with O'Connell another year. I don't quite see it with Aiden O'Connell, but if they don't love the options, like I think it's a viable one for another season. But yeah, eventually they're going to have to answer that quarterback question, and that's something he's going to have to nail for this hire to work out.
Don't know if it's exactly a hot take to say you're not haven't fully bought into Aiden O'Connell.
Yeah, I don't think it is either. But like, I don't know. Like, I guess if it came down to like, do you trade for Ryan Tannehill or something like that, or is he a free agent or whatever? But do you go with like a Ryan Tannehill, or do you just go with Aiden O'Connell another year? Like, I would disagree, but I wouldn't hate them saying we'll go with O'Connell one more year and then figure it out next year. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I think part of the issue too, though, is look at what happened with I brought up the Titans, but like then Arthur Smith does well as an offensive coordinator, then he gets a head coaching job, right? That's part of the issue with the if you're a defensive minded coach, you kind of have to nail the offensive coordinator, but then also they can
continually nail it.
Yeah. Whereas if you're an offensive mind, if you just get a good offensive mind, well then you still have to nail the defensive coordinator, but it feels like that's a little bit easier.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on. Let's go to the Panthers. Why don't we? We already talked about them earlier. So, Dan Morgan, the general manager, is someone who, interesting little way he's gotten his way to be here. He's bounced around. He's been in Seattle, Buffalo, and in the past few years he was with Carolina. So finally gets promoted to be the GM there. Dave Canales, someone who I paid close attention to as a Tampa Bay fan this past season, who did some. I didn't think he was amazing or anything, but I think clearly the thing with Canales is he's someone who, had did a great job with Baker this year and did a great job with Geno Smith the previous year. And this feels very much like a let's fix Bryce Young hire.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, because he was kind of, when he was hired, he was kind of tipped as this like, kind of wonderkind of the offensive coordinator field, right? Like this was kind of viewed as like a big deal hire at the time, correct?
Kind of. I don't know if I would say it's that. I don't know if I would say it was that much. I don't think he wasn't considered like a Sean McVay type, I don't think.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, but like you said, he did a good job last year. I guess the only question is like, if you're going offensive coordinator, fix the quarterback situation. Was he the best offensive coordinator, kind of quarterback developmental guy you could get? I think that's very much a question, especially when,
with how many people would say yes to that job potentially.
Right. Like we don't know if like Bobby Slowick was interested. We don't know if Ben Johnson was interested. And it's another one where we aren't in the interview room. So, Canales could have better interview than Slowick and Johnson. So who knows how it works. But, I'm willing to give it a chance. And, similar thing, if he's able to kind of strike gold with how he works with the quarterback again, this could be a good hire for Carolina.
Yeah, it could. There's definitely the potential. I mean, the Panthers in the Tepper era have not nailed the head coaches very well. Frank Reich went and done last year. It makes sense. Again, there were moments. I mean, there was a point halfway through the season where people were ready for Canales to be fired. So it goes to show how quickly things can change. But I still think he does some of his. Again, how much of it is him? How much of it is Todd Bowles? There still is a bit of things that drive you crazy, but there's no denying, especially at the end of the year, X's and O's were very good. But you know how I feel about this stuff. They still need receivers. Like a coordinator can only do so much. A play caller can only do so much.
Yeah, and not having a first round pick doesn't help that. But yeah, they gotta get some guys, however possible.
Yeah. Well, let's move on then. Let's go to Brian Callahan of the Titans. This was a surprise. This was a bit out of left field. Someone who has been the Bengals offensive coordinator for a few years. So okay, kind of in that the Sean McVay tree a little bit, because Zach Taylor obviously used to coach under Sean McVay. Although I don't know how fair that is, but somewhat fair. There's definitely been moments that have driven me crazy watching the Bengals this, over the past years. But at the same time, he is someone who comes from I would say a somewhat forward-thinking organization, right? Even though I've had my
Mhm.
issues of the offensive play calling. What's your thought on this one?
Um, I think from what I've heard, and based on the reporting of this, a lot of this conversation is basically Callahan's relationship with Joe Burrow was kind of the biggest reason for this, and that he was. It's almost like that. Who was it? It's kind of like the Matt Nagy, Nat Hackett thing, where he was very open to letting Joe Burrow, kind of make his decisions and kind of empower him as a quarterback, and they felt like that was the best part of his development, and so that was the decision making behind bringing Callahan in as the head coach, is that he really knows how to build that relationship with the quarterback. The issue is I just compared him to Nathaniel Hackett and Matt Nagy.
Right.
So I think that could work, and obviously the biggest thing is when you talk about those guys. The toughest thing when you hire a guy for their quarterback relationship is those guys I just listed were Joe Burrow's coach, Aaron Rodgers' coach, and Peyton Manning's coach. I feel like that plays a bigger role in the quarterback development than the guy having the good relationship with the quarterback, right? So,
Yeah.
maybe he's able to do something similar with Will Levis, or I don't know. That's the question I have going forward with this one is did you hire a guy because he has a good quarterback or because he's actually a good coach? I think that's the question I have.
Right, and the guy you didn't list was, the Adam Gase, right? I mean, that's the,
Yes. Thank you.
clear one there as well. I mean, it's just a question of yes, he was there to develop Joe Burrow, but how much credit do you give him? And who knows? I'm sure in the interview he's saying, "Oh, here's what I did." When Joe Burrow came walking in, he was a bumbling idiot, and I fixed. I'm sure did whatever he could to get the job. And even with Dave Canales, I still feel like we can't guarantee that he's the reason why Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield both got better. There's reason to believe that that's possible because it happened twice. So you can at least there's more here. For Callahan, it feels like who knows. And again, think about Brian Dable, who he got a job because of the Josh Allen development. And I would say it's worked out well for the Giants. I mean, last year, I don't know how many wins you're getting anyway with that, but he did get a good year out of Daniel Jones. So it's not the worst idea in the world. And again, I would prefer going offensive than defensive there. But I don't know. Kind of think I would have rather just had Mike Vrabel.
Yeah, I think I would too. So we'll see. I mean, maybe it works out for him, maybe it doesn't. But it certainly was one of the more interesting hires, and it we kind of just chronicled the Tennessee thing the past couple of years. The Vrabel thing I thought was weird and kind of unceremonious for how good he was those past few years. The GM decision last season when it seemed like they wanted to turn over the whole roster, and yeah, I don't know. It just seems like another bizarre turn in a bizarre couple of seasons for this franchise, right?
Yeah. I don't know what's going on there. Let's move on. Let's go to how about the Atlanta Falcons? Raheem Morris, their new head coach. This is an interesting hire. Raheem Morris, not a first time head coach. He was, a head coach of Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 2009 to 2011. Had a 10-win season with Josh Freeman. So that's definitely something that you look at and say, okay, there was something there. I think the general consensus on Morris, nice things, but was kind of in over his head. He was, he's 47 now, right? And he had the job over a decade ago. So was definitely in over his head. I remember Rondé Barber, who was still on the team, was older than him, which now I feel like that happens a little bit, but at the time that was just not happening at all. Since then, he kind of worked his way back up. He couldn't even get a coordinator job for a while. He didn't get a coordinator job until Atlanta had him as the coordinator in 2020. Then goes to the Rams for the past few years. Does a good job there. Guys in the McVay tree tend to work out. He's not someone who's been in the McVay tree his entire career, but he has been there recently. I'm not a defensive-minded coach guy. I don't think it's the best idea, but I think if you were to go defensive-minded coaches, I don't hate this hire at all from that perspective.
Yeah, I'm willing to give him a chance. And, he obviously did very well with this Rams team the past few years. And, he's kind of, he is a very good defensive coordinator. He's proven that he's a good defensive coordinator for several years. And, if he's learned from his previous mistakes with the last job, obviously, like you said, he was very young. I mean, 32 as a head coach is crazy, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
so, let's see we'll see how he's developed since then and what he's learned from those mistakes. But, I think he's inheriting a pretty good team, pretty good roster outside of quarterback. So maybe this works out for him. And, I think he's going to do some good things. I'm excited for the hire, and I'm excited for him to get this opportunity.
Am I just a hater? What does everyone see about the Falcons that I don't see? I feel like year after year, it's like, this is 2 years in a row now. Everyone's like, "Oh, look at the Falcons. If they can just get getting the quarterback is a really important aspect. Like that's not
It
a team
is,
that's a quarterback away. A team that's good except for no quarterback is a bad football team."
Yeah, but we've seen, you're the example. You're the exact example of this. Now, Tom Brady's not on the market, but your team was a quarterback away. Look how much difference that made.
I think, well, sure, and if they get an elite quarterback, then I will change my tune about the Falcons.
Yeah, got to give him a chance. Let's see what happens this offseason.
I guess so. It's possible. I think that my point is that they need to really get the quarterback, and they don't have a high draft pick this year. So we'll see. I still feel like you have to at least, I don't know, maybe try to get a quarterback. Try more than spend a third round pick on a guy.
Yeah. I'm curious how aggressive they get, or is this a Kirk Cousins team? I don't know. We'll see.
We'll see. I think there's about a dozen teams that we're gonna wonder if they're gonna go after Kirk Cousins. He's gonna get so much money.
Yeah, I was just looking at it the other day. I should pull up that message that I had because I was looking at which teams are actually in the market for a quarterback, and I basically listed like teams that are definitely starting a new quarterback next year: Chicago, Washington, New England, Atlanta, Denver, and then I put the maybes as Las Vegas, Minnesota, New York Giants. And then I put the available quarterbacks as draft picks 1, 2, and 3, Cousins, Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, Daniel Jones, Ryan Tannehill, Jacoby Brissett, Gardner Minshew, Jake Browning, Tyrod Taylor, Joe Flacco, right? You can get down the list. It gets pretty grim fast. So, like, I don't know. So what? There's basically anywhere between 6 to 8, 9 teams, 5 to 8 teams that need a quarterback. So it's going to be interesting this offseason. That's for sure.
Yeah. But we'll see what Morris does. Let's move on. Let's go to the one that was just announced today. Mike Macdonald, Seahawks head coach here. This was an interesting one as well. As again, it seemed like they were in on the Ben Johnson sweepstakes at least a little bit. I don't know how in they were. Another defensive guy. So, team's not afraid to go after defensive coordinators, despite what the narrative has turned into. Was with the Ravens for a while. Did have 1 year with Jim Harbaugh in Michigan before coming back, being the defensive coordinator for a couple years until now, where he will be the head coach for Seattle. I don't know. I mean, I guess a defensive-minded head coach worked last time, so I get why they're doing it. Defense should be very good with all these young corners. I think this could be a good fix defensively for them.
Yeah. Pete, you just know going into this interview, Pete Carroll loved this guy, right?
Yeah, probably. I think so.
Yeah, I mean, and they were even saying that like Baltimore was prepared or Seattle was prepared to wait until after the Super Bowl if they made it that far. Like this was basically their number one guy. Now, granted, so Mike Macdonald, he was literally the kind of wonderkind of defensive coordinators. When he was promoted from Baltimore, they let a very good defensive coordinator or a very popular defensive coordinator go in Wink Martindale to promote him to DC, and they felt like that was an upgrade. He has been a guy who has been long tipped to be a head coach in the NFL at one day. It happened obviously this year. This defense was fantastic. Willing to give it a chance. I will say, like, the good news is, like, if you're bringing in a defensive coordinator, like, this isn't a bad offense to have set up for your defensive coordinator to inherit, right? Like, you kind of have the pieces in place on offense. It's fixing the defense and then hiring the offensive coordinator. So, I know Geno does, Geno's not perfect, but I still think he's a pretty good quarterback. I think he's going to be good in Seattle this next season again. And I think that's a good fit for that situation.
Yeah. One thing, we talked about 32 being so young for a head coach. Macdonald's 36. So, definitely, if they hit on this hire, they got a good head coach for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. And as Karen said here, he wasn't promoted. He went to college ball. He went to his brother's team and then basically came back to Baltimore. So, yeah, I mean, so yeah, first season as a coach in Baltimore, defensive coordinator, but he was very good. So,
well, technically, he was promoted. He was a coaching intern, and then got promoted up to Baltimore, and then got the defensive coordinator job at Michigan.
Yeah,
he had some promotions along the way in Baltimore.
So, would you be shocked if this is Raheem Morris 2.0, as we just talked about Raheem Morris getting the job, getting another job?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible.
Morris was the same exact thing in Tampa a decade ago, right? He was the young, up and coming, like biggest name on the market defensive coordinator.
Yeah, I don't know. It would be hard to have weirder press conferences than Morris had, though.
Yeah, that's fair.
He had a couple of those. I got to look up exactly what the quotes were. He had a couple of wild ones.
Yeah. But no, I mean, I'm willing to give it a shot. I always say we'll see if it works out, because like I feel like grading, like I can question some things, like once again, like if you're hiring an offensive coordinator that's not Ben Johnson and Bobby Slowick, I think you have to explain yourself. But at the same time, we don't know who is in the market for the jobs.
Except when it's Jonathan Gannon. Then you're like, absolutely horrible hire, will never work.
Yeah, and he actually turned out all right.
Yeah, because who knows?
Yeah. If anyone hires Matt Patricia, I will be ready. I will be ready to put an F on that grade.
Okay. Yeah. Last thing to talk about. I don't know how much you have to say about Adam Peters, Washington GM. Was for San Francisco for a while. Also was a scout for the Broncos when they won a Super Bowl, and was a scout for I believe he got promoted past scout when the Broncos won the Super Bowl, but he was a scout there for a while. Was a scout for the Patriots from 2003 to 2008. Has been a part of a lot of winning organization. Again, who knows? But the resume seems good.
Yeah. San Francisco seems like a really good team to hire from. I would agree with that. So yeah, we'll see how it works out. It looks interesting. What is your? So I was going to ask you this one. This is off script. What is your favorite coordinator hire, Fangio or Arthur Smith to Pittsburgh?
I think I would go Fangio over Arthur Smith.
Yeah, I like both, but yeah, I mean the Fangio one, that feels like an instant fix for almost everything, right?
People were not happy with the Arthur Smith hire.
Really?
Yeah, well, because he wasn't a great head. Arthur Smith gets a lot of hate. Like he's one of the more hated. People talk about him like he's Patricia.
I don't see it. Like he was legitimately a good offensive. Like Patricia wasn't a good defensive coordinator. That was my argument. Like he was a good offensive coordinator and is still a good offensive coordinator.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I feel like with Smith, I feel like if you're a head coach for a team that isn't very talented, like what was Arthur Smith supposed to do? Like I feel like with the Falcons, like Desmond Ridder was turning the ball over every play. Like there's only so much you can do.
Yeah, I don't. Well, I still think it's a good hire. We'll see if it works out, but I mean, I think he's going to help the Pittsburgh offense. It's going to be better than what they had last year, that's for sure.
Yeah. Should be interesting. Oh, okay. Those are the coaching and GM. Excuse me. Those are the coaching and GM hires. The thumbnail, the thing we promised, the thing that we gotta get our clicks somehow, right? Got to do the Mahomes GOAT conversation a little bit, because it is something that has come up, and I was interested in your thoughts. We like Tom Brady here. I'm pretty sure, I'm going to assume we both own Tom Brady memorabilia of some kind. Me being a Tampa Bay fan, you being a Patriots fan. It's a discussion that's happened. Mahomes now trying to win his third Super Bowl. He's now made 4 Super Bowls in 5 seasons. Tom Brady never made 4 Super Bowls in 5 seasons. He certainly had a unbelievable start to his career, and probably the greatest start to a career anyone has ever had, potentially, especially if he can pull off this victory here. 2 MVPs as well. Where are you at? Some people are already saying he's the greatest quarterback of all time. What are your thoughts on all this?
So yeah, I mean, you set it up nicely. Obviously, this is a podcast with a Buccaneers fan and a Patriots fan. So this is not going to be the most unbiased opinion. I'm going to preface it with that. Look, I think if you're saying just individual talent, like, yeah, Mahomes might be it's probably the most individually talented quarterback ever. Like,
Mhm.
I don't think, I don't think that's up for much debate. Although I think Brady gets like underrated for like his individual talent. Like, the dude's 6'4", 230 and played in bad weather basically his entire career, and
Mhm.
could make throws in basically every game. He had a 6 touchdown game in like horrible snow. Like,
Mhm.
I don't think people give him credit enough. Basically, he's not viewed as a good
Brady doesn't
athlete
get
because
credit.
yeah, he's
We've
not
got to
viewed as a
start
good
talking about Brady being a
yeah.
good quarterback.
Well, if we're having the
No,
Mahomes
I know
GOAT
I'm joking, but
conversation,
yeah, you're right.
it starts there, right? Like, so
Mhm.
Brady's not viewed as a good athlete because he runs slow. Like, that's the only conversation. And if
Mhm.
that's your argument, like, okay, I don't believe that is the only thing that reveals to athleticism. Now, if you go, by the resume, there's still no debate to me that Mahomes isn't the best quarterback of all time by resume. And mainly a lot of that is tenure, right? Like, Brady basically owns every passing record imaginable. He's played 20 plus years. He's won 7 Super Bowls. I mean, all that still, I think, matters. But, if you break it down into, quadrants, like Mahomes, I saw the graphic pop up of the first 6 years of Patrick Mahomes versus the first 6 years of Tom Brady. Everyone probably saw this graphic, but I'll rehash it here. Regular season record: Mahomes 72-22, Brady 70 wins and 24 losses. Playoff record: Mahomes 14-3, Brady 12-2. AFC titles: 4 to Mahomes, 3 to Brady. Reigns: 2 to Mahomes, could be his third this year. 3 to Tom Brady. The touchdown and interception stuff's on here. I don't really like the touchdown and interception stuff because, I mean, it's just two different eras of football. But, Mahomes has more touchdowns, obviously, and less interceptions. So, yeah, I mean, I think if you're going to compare the first 6 years of these two guys, like, Mahomes is on the path to being the best quarterback ever. Like, sure, he's probably
Mhm.
on the greatest of all time. But it's going to take a lot more than 6 years for me to convince that. So I definitely think it could happen. I still want to see a lot more before I'm willing to anoint him the GOAT, because like the thing with Brady is that it took multiple iterations of the Patriots that he was still amazing at, right? Like, he was still great for 20 years. Like, the first iteration of the Patriots, he was great. They won 3 Super Bowls. The second iteration of the Patriots, he was probably his best ever, and they didn't win Super Bowls. And then they still won 3 Super Bowls, and he was great and won multiple MVPs and beat Patrick Mahomes multiple times in the playoffs, I might add. So it's just going to take time before I'm willing to accept that.
Yeah, and I think the Brady being 2-0 in the playoffs is going to go in his favor. I do think about that Buccaneers Super Bowl, and if it went the other way, if the Chiefs won, imagine that scenario where Mahomes would now be going for what, his fourth Super Bowl. Brady would have six, and Mahomes would have a win in the Super Bowl against, like, how much it was kind of a joke at the time of like, oh man, this could decide who's going to end up being the GOAT at the end of the day, and people were kind of saying, like, one guy has 6 Super Bowls. It's not going to, well, maybe so. I mean, if anything, it's pretty impressive that Mahomes has even entered the discussion, because right when Brady
Yeah.
retired, we said no one's ever going to touch it. And almost immediately, we have a guy who's like trying to put himself in that discussion.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. And like, it's been really impressive. And the fact that it happened, like, because the funny thing is, like, I think as a society, we're just really quick. We want to be really quick nowadays to anoint what we see as the best. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and, I think
Yeah.
we see a lot, like college football. I think I mentioned it before on this podcast. Like, every college football season, when the national champion wins, we say, is this the greatest team of all time? And like, the answer should always be no. Um, but
Right.
we have to bring up the conversation every time. And it's like immediately after Brady retires, we're ready to have the conversation. Is this quarterback the greatest of all time? And it's just funny how that kind of turned out. But he is legitimately on the path to being that kind of level of player. So we'll see if it happens for him. We'll see if he hits that level. I do think the thing I do want to add for this, because like you said, so the biggest difference between the two, especially like if Mahomes, wins his third ring, the biggest difference between the two is Mahomes and having the 2 MVPs in his first 6 seasons.
Mm-hmm.
I do think Brady, compared to his contemporaries, is somewhat underrated for those 6 years. He made the Pro Bowl 3 of those first 6 seasons. He finished MVP top 3 twice in those 6 seasons. Like, he was by no means like this game manager that people want to believe. Like his team was consistently top 10 in offense. And the one year they weren't top 10 in offense, they won the Super Bowl, and his best receiving option was his best offensive weapon was a second year Deion Branch in 2003. And, I think that 2003 Patriots season has a lot of resemblances to this Chiefs season. So yeah, I think I think his first 6 seasons were kind of underrated, and by year 7, he was kind of the undisputed best quarterback in the NFL because that was the 2007 season where he threw 50 touchdowns. So I think Brady's kind of early career stuff is being overlooked when you think about some of this stuff. But Mahomes, like I said, the first 6 seasons he has been better than Brady. He's got to do it for 14 more years.
Yeah, exactly. That's the issue, right? But I mean, and I think the box score stats are always going to be misleading when it comes to this. I mean, there's people that think John Elway wasn't good because he didn't have great box score stats, right? Like people who didn't watch a player, but then will go and just look at the the passer rating and say, oh wow, they actually stunk. And I think there's no better example of it than this year for Mahomes is probably his most impressive year. What he's done in this playoff run and what he's done to be able to get his team to the Super Bowl. This is easily his worst statistical year, right? So that's kind of how I view it with it. That being said, I think, I don't know. I've never been someone who's like, oh, Brady's the GOAT, can't even discuss it. And I'm also not someone who says that 7 is greater than whatever Mahomes has, so therefore Brady is the best. I think that's not, football is a team game. That's not exactly how it works. I think Mahomes is on pace to be the greatest quarterback of all time. But that doesn't mean that he is the greatest quarterback of all time now, because it's a lot easier to do it for 6 years than it is to do it for 20.
Yeah, it's just so hard, right? Like the statistical stuff for football is probably the hardest sport statistically to compare, right? Like baseball, there is comparisons to be made, stuff like that. Basketball, I think even Wilt Chamberlain is probably the skewed statistic, but a lot of the statistics I think could still be compared. Whereas like football, like if you talk to an old head, like they would swear Terry Bradshaw was that guy. But then you look at Terry Bradshaw's like statistical resume and it's like, well, I don't know what to do with this compared to the guys now. It's just a completely different game. Like it's night and day. And, you'll have other, less old heads saying like Joe Montana was that guy. And Joe Montana's numbers aren't going to compare to the guys today. You could make a statistical case Phillip Rivers was better than Joe Montana. You would be incorrect, but that's just what the nature of the sport is now.
Well, right. And there's a couple other aspects too. There's the aspect of quarterbacks are basically always getting better. So, people I don't know. It's the whole thing, in basketball, you see it, right? Where you look at a game tape from today versus from 30 years ago, guys are bigger and stronger now, right? There is that aspect of it. But also there's the aspect of the game has legitimately changed in a lot of ways. Like passing is going to be, a mediocre quarterback's numbers are going to be way better than what they were 40 years ago. Is that because they're better? Well, maybe, but I think it's also probably, but the defenders are going to be better too, right? So I think it's probably more so the rule changes and how you can't, they protected offensive players so much, which is good, but that's obviously going to make offense more, now it's legitimately if teams are playing cover 2, you still pass into it, right? It's like it used to be if you're throwing into cover 2, you're just an idiot. Now, now it's you have to, everyone's doing that basically. So, and I think another interesting factor here is I think because of that, teams with the elite quarterback should be in championship contention every year, right? Whereas it used to be teams with elite quarterbacks would have years where they were missing the playoffs.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, and that's what's shocking about the Justin Herbert stuff, right? And the Chargers situation and why their GM's getting hired again comes into question.
Right.
So yeah, it is a fascinating debate to have. I don't think I'm not ready to entertain the debate yet, but Mahomes obviously is on the path. He is fantastic, and I'll keep an open mind to everything. I'm biased, so I'm probably going to say I'll never see anything like Tom Brady again. But I guess the question is going to become, when does it actually become a legitimate conversation for us to have? Does he have to win 5? Does he have to win 7? That's when the conversation becomes interesting to me.
Yeah. And I agree with what you said too about that's my last thought on this is we like to think that what we're watching now is the greatest ever. Cause I mean, and even the Super Bowl, right? You want to feel like there's more of it means more than just a game. And, for it's a dynasty thing, right? We talked about how every team that's having a good run, we always say, is it a dynasty? And we always say, yes, it's a dynasty. It's a Chiefs dynasty. I brought up the Tampa Bay Lightning, who won back to back, and people are like, Lightning dynasty. And it's like, now no one says, oh, yeah, that was the Lightning dynasty. But at the time, everyone was saying it. And it's only been a couple years, Like, I think that's, we just, because we want to feel like we're watching a dynasty. Even when we hate the team that's always winning, we still are so quick to say, yep, dynasty.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it all kind of plays a factor. And, I think one of the things I mentioned about this Mahomes Chiefs thing is like the future of this franchise, I think, is so fascinating because like the Patriots run just is probably the most impressive like thing any professional sports franchise has ever done. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, obviously you had like the Canadians winning a bunch and the Yankees, but like, especially like, you could kind of bankroll your team. Like there are real salary cap constraints and draft constraints that make winning consistently as often as they did one of the hardest things basically in sports. And the Chiefs had to make the decision with Tyreek Hill. You could debate whether the Tyreek Hill trade decision was right or wrong, but that's the decision they made. And now there's already been reports this season that Travis Kelce might retire this offseason after this season, right? So then I think one of the things that made the Patriots seem so impressive is, Brady had those years where Rashay Caldwell, rest in peace, was his number one receiver. He had they had constantly, reinventing themselves, making new iterations of the team that allowed them to be as successful and competitive as they were for 20 years. How did the Chiefs match that? I think it was one of the interesting things because, Mahomes had Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, and not to mention Andy Reid as the head coach when he entered the league. And I think one of the things with Brady is like he had Belichick throughout that tenure that helped, but it's not guaranteed that Mahomes is going to have Andy Reid his entire tenure. Andy Reid's not young. He's probably not going to have Travis Kelce his entire tenure, and he lost Tyreek Hill. So how does this Chiefs team keep reinventing themselves?
Yeah, so far it's gone very well. It's since the Tyreek Hill thing. So I think we're all kind of assuming it'll work out, but you're right. We don't know. I mean, Kelce, had a down season and is, I believe he's 34 years old. Andy Reid, 65. And also Chris Jones, he held out this year. Seems like he wants a big contract. So, winning 7 Super Bowls is ridiculously difficult. And even if he wins 7, if he wins 5 more Super Bowls, which is more than any quarterback not named Tom Brady has won, any player, actually I believe there's one player who won 5, but any quarterback not named Tom Brady, no one's won 5 other than him. He would have to win that many more. Would help if, in a little bit over a week, if he can get, his third there, then he would be tied with Brady. Then people would still say, well, Brady was 2-0 against him in the playoffs. So you might have to win another one.
Yeah, exactly. So, people, at the end of the day, people are going to have their own opinions, right? Like if you wanted to make the argument for Mahomes, you could probably make it right now. I wouldn't agree with it, but you probably could. And at the end of the day, people are going to make the comments for Brady being 2-0 against Mahomes in the playoffs. And that, that will be the Trump factor for people. So I don't know. It becomes interesting at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, a fun discussion to be had. I know everyone makes fun of the GOAT conversations. I always kind of find them fun. Although they do get
when they're tasteful.
Sure.
Yeah. When they're tasteful, it's fun. Like when I just hear people like 6 rings, man, for LeBron and Jordan, you can lose me. I'll just check out.
Well, the thing is, it's objectively a great conversation of like who's the greatest. The issue is that it's such a good conversation, even like dumb people want to have it.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone's got an opinion on it. Not everybody should.
Yes, I think so, which is the case for a lot of things. But opinions we do want to hear more. So questions, listener questions. I made a community tab. I'm going to read some questions off there, but also in the chat. If you have just any general questions, put them in the chat. We'll do maybe 10 minutes or so of questions. Kyle, first one here is the role of an organization in winning a Super Bowl undervalued or overstated? Jerry Jones versus the Chiefs owner, for example. This is by Ghostman. 2316. What do you think about the owner of a organization and how much that matters? Because I kind of feel like it is underrated. I think that there is a lot of value. Yeah. It's hard because we don't know exactly what goes on behind the scenes, but it does feel like, sometimes we're like, man, why does this team suck year after year? But then you hear like the owner is just like a horrible, horrible at their job. I think it does matter.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I do think it does matter. I would think it does matter. You know, and it comes down to, as a simple thing, and it's something we could all relate to, honestly, if we think about it. Like, you know, did you like the job where you enjoyed working for your boss more, or the job you didn't like your boss as much? Like,
Hmm.
um, and obviously, it's different from like working with like an immediate manager to like a CEO type or something like that. But yeah, I think ownership does play a part. The big thing with me is like there are reasons. It's very obvious to me there are reasons why guys like James Dolan or Donald Sterling, Robert Sarver, um, and then like Dan Snyder. There's a reason why those people don't seem to win a lot.
Hmm. Yeah.
And it just comes off that way. I think the big thing with ownership is like, or at least what I've seen from good owners, is you have to be a provider to the team first of all, and be willing to open your pockets, because spending money is the most important part to winning championships in modern sports. And then the second part to me is like, you have to accept you don't know anything, right? Like, owners who try and meddle generally don't work out because they're not sports people. They have backgrounds, they made their money from very different backgrounds, and the owners who don't seem to meddle and understand that they're not involved generally tend to work out more than owners who are involved in everything.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. Question for at Jackson Career Sports. You can just ask the question. You don't have to. We got it, Kieran. Who do you want at quarterback next year for the Bucks? I think Mahomes.
Yeah, good call.
Yeah, I think that's what I want. I mean, my real answer is I mean, realistically, yes, it'd be great if we could get an elite quarterback. If Herbert demands out, that'd be cool. But I want Baker. Baker was good this year. No reason. I want to run him out of town. I do. I am someone though. I don't want to just. I don't want Baker no matter what. If there is a scenario where here Baker signs a deal and I'm disappointed because of what the money is.
Yeah. So if he gets Daniel Jones's contract, are you thrilled?
No, I'm very upset if he gets Daniel Jones' contract. Absolutely. Like I like Baker. I want to root for Baker, but like if he has a contract that's going to saddle our team and we're going to stink for the next 3 years, like then now I'm not happy. Like, and that's the weird thing about sports with the cap stuff, right? It's like you can like a
Yeah.
player, but then dislike the money that they're getting.
Okay. Now, I guess the question is like, because obviously the tough part is like his contract was signed years ago, so the market was different. If he gets like Jared Goff level contract, are you happy with that?
Well, Jared Goff at the time. So you're saying like because Jared Goff at the time, I think that was like one of the highest paid contracts. But like, are you saying like a Jared Goff contract like 30 million now?
Yes, basically.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that feels good for me. I would be happy with that. And I was even looking at some projections, and people were saying like 25 million. I think he's getting more than that. I think I'd feel okay with 30 million. Yeah, and I know people might say, is 10 million really that big of a difference? But I really think it is. I think that matters a lot.
Yeah, especially to the player.
Yeah, right, for one player. Yeah. So, and also I don't know. If he wants 40 million, don't do the Giants. Just tag him.
Yeah. Yeah, say prove it again, and then we'll revisit 40 million, right? If he does it
Yeah.
a second time in a row, then you can honestly entertain a $40 million contract, but he has to do it twice in a row, I think.
Right, because obviously the Giants with the Daniel Jones thing, they said, well, we don't want to, we want to use our franchise tag on Barkley, so we're going to make sure we pay the Daniel Jones the long-term deal. In hindsight, I think we'd be better off having tagged Jones and giving Saquon a long deal.
Yeah. The tough thing with Tampa, though, is they have other guys they could franchise tag, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the issue. So ideally, you want to just sign everybody before you have to use the franchise tag, so that way you still have the threat of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, a dog. The dog has thoughts
wow.
on this.
She just went ballistic. I don't know why. Weird.
Yeah. Okay, here's one. Is Christian McCaffrey a Hall of Famer if they win or lose? Christian McCaffrey, and let me adjust this a little bit. What about who could be getting into Hall of Fame discussion with a Super Bowl ring added? Obviously, the quarterbacks. I mean, Mahomes is already in. Purdy, it would go a long way. He's got a long way to go, of course, but it would go a long way. But I'm thinking guys like like McCaffrey, like a George Kittle potentially, or I think Kyle Shanahan is an interesting one. Kind of feels like he has a great chance at Hall of Fame if he can win on Super Bowl Sunday.
Yeah. Um, uh, yeah, I think he would have a great chance. He'd probably be in. I don't think Purdy would have a long way to go still, I think. But like you said, it'd be a great first step. Um, Mahomes, I think, would probably already be in, but it just kind of even more solidified the case. I think George Kittle would already be in, but maybe it helps. Same thing with like a Trent Williams, guys who haven't won. The thing with the Chiefs is a lot of those guys have already won multiple Super Bowls,
Right.
right? Or at least the big players. So I don't know how much more it would boost them. The question for me would be the 49ers greats. Like, I would imagine Fred Warner and George Kittle are already Hall of Famers, but like, does Trent Williams get in? Does that solidify Nick Bosa as a Hall of Famer? Debo Samuel, stuff like that. I think that's where it becomes an interesting question. McCaffrey, I would have to look at the guys who are in the Hall of Fame. That's the tough thing. I don't know who's actually in the Hall of Fame. That's probably a bad job by me. But I would imagine so basically he was Offensive Player of the Year this year, right? He would have 2 All-Pro seasons and 3 Pro Bowl seasons and a Super Bowl. Like, I would imagine that gets him in, especially if he wins Super Bowl MVP.
Yeah, I think if he wins, he's in. I think if he doesn't win, I think he still has a great chance to get it. Is the only reliable good strategy for teams beating Mahomes simply going Karate Kid on him and sending someone to break him? Kyle, should someone try to break Patrick Mahomes?
This isn't a what's that guy's name? Greg Williams run podcast.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to endorse injuring anybody on the field. But yeah, I mean, it's going to take a kind of an act of God to beat Mahomes at this point. It seems like.
Yeah, I don't know. I still feel like if I gotta say, maybe I'm sounding like what people that were hating on Brady. Obviously, Mahomes is the greatest. Obviously, Mahomes is one of the best to ever do it. Like, they scored 17 points last week. Like, I feel like we're kind of getting a bit of a head. It's like the takes aren't wrong. It's just weird that this is the week where it's happening.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if it was after the Buffalo game, which I still think was his greatest game of all time, of his career. He kind of struggled in that second half of that game. I still thought he was really good and basically eliminated the turnover worthy plays. I don't think there was one, but I don't think he was as good.
Are you a Karate Kid fan?
The first one's fine.
Well, yeah, I'm not talking about the sequels. I'm not talking about like what the what was it, Jaden Smith? Yeah, I mean, obviously, when someone says the Karate Kid, you mean the first Karate Kid. It's a classic.
It's not my favorite throwback movie or sports movie, but it's a good one.
It's up there for me. I remember as a kid, I had a portable DVD player, and like that was like the one DVD for some reason I had, like one of the few movies I had. So I probably watched that like 100 times.
Yeah, I get it. Like, I like Back to the Future more.
Sure.
Like, I'm trying to think of movies like kind of around the same time frame. Although I wasn't alive then, so I don't know the years exactly. But like, I don't know. There's a few John Hughes movies that are up there. Ferris Bueller obviously is the one that should be up there too. What else is up there from that time? Bull Durham. I think that's the same time frame.
Yeah, I'm really bad with like, if it's like movie dates in general. I watch a lot of movies, but like I'm terrible with like knowing when they are.
You could tell me anything from the 60s to the 80s is basically the same time frame, and I would believe you.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I'm not good with that. Okay. Moving on. Well, let's see. What's the trying to think of a couple. There's a couple more interesting ones. Yeah. What are your feelings on benching a rookie quarterback versus starting them right off?
It's interesting. That's my general thought. I've been trying to and it's not an easy question to figure out, so that's probably the reason why. I've been trying to figure out why it seems like quarterbacks are failing more in today's NFL. I think it's the most fascinating thing we're looking at right now. And that's not to say that it happens like quarterbacks failed previously. Like, this isn't like a newfound thing where quarterbacks bust, but it seems like it's happening more and more. And especially as we look at the 2021 draft, for example, where Zach Wilson seems to be out, Justin Fields seems to be out, Mac Jones seems to be out, Trey Lance is out already, and then Trevor Lawrence is kind of the last man standing, and honestly hasn't looked that great. And that was viewed as a generational quarterback class. So, like, I'm trying to figure out why that didn't work, right? Like, why didn't that work when we looked at all those guys as really good? Maybe not like Andrew Luck level prospects, but we did view all those guys as good prospects. So yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation to have because are we rushing these guys now? I think is the question because I just think you look at the past, like starting rookie quarterbacks previously was viewed as like an unheard of phenomenon, right? Like it was kind of controversial to start a rookie quarterback right away. And then now like maximizing rookie quarterback contract skills has become such an advantage for teams. It feels like we're ready to throw these guys into the fire right away to try and maximize that rookie contract. And I'm just curious, like, is that the right move? But then we also watch CJ Stroud like have an amazing season, and I don't know the answer to it then. So it's gonna be interesting to see what that data unfolds as the years go on. Because it just doesn't seem like there's a right answer to how to evaluate quarterbacks.
Yeah, I think the numbers say that quarterbacks who don't start right away tend to be less likely to succeed at the NFL level, but also that might be because they're not as good. They're not good enough to start right away, right? So
Yeah.
that factors in. Also, if some quarterbacks that, like a Jordan Love, part of why he rested for a while is because the Packers were good and they were trying to still be competitive. Like Patrick Mahomes, he rests, but it's because the Chiefs were trying to, they were a playoff team. So like,
Yeah.
and now you're going to a better situation, which obviously helps. So yeah, I don't know. It's interesting discussion. We'll probably never know the answer for. Okay, we'll do one last question and then we'll head out here. Let's do. I don't know. This is kind of an interesting thing as a whole. What do you think the Panthers should do to get better short term and long term? It goes on for a bit, but we'll just leave it there. Panthers, just an interesting question in general. If you're one of these teams that's awful, Kyle, I know you're anti-tanking, but like, if you don't tank, what's the pathway here?
So if we're saying don't tank,
or do you just say you should tank?
But like, what is tanking for this team? Because they already got the quarterback. So,
well, do they is the question.
Yeah, I guess that's the question. I mean, so this team has, let's see here. I was just looking at their draft pick options. They have the number 33 pick, the number 65 pick, 4th round pick, and 5th, 6th round pick. So they have some draft picks to work with. Obviously, they don't have their 1st round pick. We talked about that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it becomes interesting because not only that, but Brian Burns has to get paid. And is Brian Burns going to be worth the money that he's probably going to command? Because he's going to be one of the better edge rushers on the market. Obviously, the mistake in hindsight is not trading him for 2 first-round picks, in my opinion. But it starts, I think, with the receiver position, right? Like that's the first thing they have to address. They have to address pass catcher, and then naturally everything else can fall into place. Like this defense isn't awesome, but it's statistically pretty good, right? Like it usually performs pretty well. And even like the guys who I don't think performed well, like I think have talent. Like what's the guy's name? The safety, Jeremy Chin.
Yeah.
I think has more talent than the way he was utilized in this defense. And like he's not Kyle Hamilton, but he could be used in a Kyle Hamilton-like role and I think be successful. And so there are guys like that on the roster that I'm kind of enthralled by. And also the defense performs statistically well. So I don't think that's far. It's just addressing a lot of issues on the offense and then figuring out the Bryce Young equation. So if they're able to kind of load up the talent around Bryce Young and say, hey, this is your opportunity now. We hired you an offensive coach. We got you the talent around you. Go prove yourself. The only issue is then if that doesn't work out, then you're kind of screwed.
Yeah, I think it's actually pretty simple. Do whatever you can to create a good situation for Bryce Young. Because if he stinks next year, then guess what? You've created a good situation for the quarterback you draft next year.
Yeah, exactly. So makes sense.
That's how I view it. So, all right. Kyle, that is our show. Let them know to find us on Twitter before we head out.
Yeah, make sure to follow us on Twitter. That is at Jackson Kruger. Make sure to follow me at by Kyle Grondin. And make sure to follow the account page at On the Sideline JK. That is at On the Sideline JK.
Of course, if you like audio-only podcasts, anywhere you get your podcasts, just search On the Sideline Podcast. It should be available there. Kieran in the chat says Lamar is a running back. Ha, 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 burn. So, Kieran, we know is a big Lamar hater.
Yeah. This has been an interesting chat experience. We mentioned one Steelers mini tangent with Arthur Smith, and I think I've seen nothing but Steelers takes in the chat. It's quite remarkable. The dedication to this is insane.
Well, our Wednesday shows, we have less people in the chat. So I think if you really want to get people riled up, this is a show you can do it.
Yeah, this is definitely the opportunity for you to come in and troll.
Yeah, I think so. Next Sunday, so Sunday at 9, we're going to do our the great show, the one we always enjoy doing, the picking who will win Super Bowl MVP. Can we keep the streak alive? 3 years in a row. We only get to pick 20. We don't have 20 picks. We pick the Super Bowl MVP every time, Kyle. That's only like half of the guys playing.
I know. We're on fire. We're going to nail it. This is definitely like a more ridiculous podcast. We're going to have some fun. We're going to crack some jokes. You know, Kadarius Toney is not going to make my list. I'll break that news right now. Just to let you know. Kadarius Toney did not make my top 20.
List last year.
Yeah. He did not crack my
had a
top
good
20
game
this year. Yeah, he had a touchdown in the game, didn't he?
Yeah.
So, you know, maybe he does it again this year. Don't see it happening. But he's not going to make my list.
Okay. Thanks for letting me know. I do say, though, as silly as it is, I feel like we do get a little bit of insight into how we feel about certain things, kind of, matchups and stuff like that. But then, of course, a week from today, same time, 5 Eastern, we will do our full Super Bowl preview. One of the more, we one of the sillier shows is the MVP. One of the more, I feel like, higher brow shows we tend to do is our Super Bowl preview. That one's always a fun one. And, of course, at some point, we'll figure out exact time after the Super Bowl. Might do midnight because Super Bowls go long and want to give everyone to have time to get home from the Super Bowl parties and stuff. But we'll do our recap after the Super Bowl, of course, as well. So yeah, a lot of fun stuff. Kyle, any final thoughts?
No, let's get out of here. You should be watching our Super Bowl recap at your Super Bowl party. Everyone mingles, hang out and listen to us post Super Bowl. That sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's good. And then the Super Bowl preview before.
Yeah, exactly. People want to, they come in, they have their drinks, they listen to us preview. They're all there for the commercials, the halftime show, and then the roast post game. I mean, that's awesome.
Although I'm now realizing we would only get credit for one view in this scenario, so that's not great.
Rewatch it.
Yeah. I think just have a bunch of like tablets out so everyone can watch on their own.
Yeah, I agree. That is a brilliant idea. Yeah, we should really start marketing ourselves to larger audiences like that. Like, let's just get party-sized audiences.
Should we get a Super Bowl commercial? You think we should try to get into budget? Everyone, if super chat real quick for enough for a Super Bowl commercial, so that way we can do that. So we'll stick around for like 30 seconds. We'll get the super chats for our Super Bowl commercial, and then we'll be good.
Yeah, I imagine we're going to come up a little bit short.
I don't know. Maybe. I mean, I don't know. It's been like 10 seconds. Like, what's happening? We don't even have enough yet.
I don't know. I'm talking about West Ham. Big game tomorrow against.
Yeah, you're just done with it. You've clocked out already. So let's just get out of here then. Thank you to everybody. We'll see you all Sunday at 9. Until next time, have a good one.
Peace.